Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. On this very special episode of Super Pulp Science, I am joined by Dr. Jonathan Ball, my collaborator on The Eye Collector. This is part of a two-part conversation, so if you'd like to hear more, you can jump on over to Writing the Wrong Way at strangerfiction.ca, where you can find a whole bunch of stuff. What did you say? New website?
It's Jonathan's new website.
Oh, well, strangerfiction.ca. Right?
All right, that's fine. Yeah, okay.
You provided me with a full script, meaning that every panel was described what should be happening in that panel. It included the dialogue that would appear in that panel and a rough sort of geography of how you saw the pages would be laid out in terms of double page spreads or what the beats were or how the individual constituent parts would fit together. A detailed script. Different from a Marvel style script, which is a general description of what you need to happen on the page and you let the artist figure it out. What I would then do with that detailed description is I would go through and would ask Jonathan to tell me what is the emotional beat, what's the important thing that would happen on this page. And it got to the point where his drafts would include, this is the most important thing I need to see on this page. Because what I would do with it is I would then synthesize, how can I make, if this page is a math problem where the solution is showing that important thing, how do we get from nothing, the blank page, to that important thing using the individual constituent parts of our story? And we have characters in that story, we have line, we have tone, but I also employed texture as a narrative device. So I made these washes, which I used to represent, and I had done this technique in another book called Will I See that I did with David Alexander Robertson and singer-songwriter Isque, where I used these textural appearances on the art as narrative clues. And so when these certain smoky textures appear, it means that something surreal is occurring. It could be dream, it could be magic, it could be imagination, but whatever happens when those textures appear, it might not be totally real or totally present. And so then I went through the script and I looked at all the different places where the elements of the story were subject to interpretation by the characters inside the story. And then I would look at what is that interpretation and how can I twist it so that what appears on the page is a little bit of a puzzle to the reader on the first read, but becomes more obvious when you got to the end. So at the end of every issue, once you kind of hear the punchline of the 22-page sort of chapter arcs, you can go back to the beginning and see, oh, that foreshadows that. This foreshadows this. This is an echo of this image, and playing back and forth as an individual unit. When Jonathan came to me and said, I want to make comics, what is the unit of comics? I said the most common unit of comics is the 22-page issue, the floppy. So if you can write your story in those units, you'll at least be creating things that the general comic reading audience is aware of, or at least the older one. Modern comic audiences are more familiar with the graphic novel, getting it all at once. But if you can write a story that sets up characters, setting, plot, and reaches a conclusion inside of 22 pages, much like the prose short story, you get in and out, present an idea, then you'll be able to present comics in a way that, publishers and stores and readers will at least understand the unit of delivery, even if they find the story a little bit difficult to accept or understand. We approached it really kind of, from an ivory tower position of like, we're going to make something weird and it's okay if people don't understand it. I wanted at least one thing that they understood to be, there are chapters, and when the chapter is over, if you're confused, the secrets have been revealed visually when you get to the end, and you can go back and see those repetitions. So like really specifically, one thing I did is in the script, there is a call for the character of Nathan's mother to be essentially under the spell of an abusive husband and an abusive like dream parasite, essentially. And so she kind of is in this repetitive role for the first long time, restating the same things and redoing the same things and always having this kind of attitude. And in my own art style, I found that the quickest, simplest way to represent that she can't change was to simply repeat the images we'd already seen of her in different contexts, but that eventually the reader would be like, wait, this is the same panel as the last page when the mom is talking. Hey, that's the same panel as the first page. Why is the mother never changing, but these other characters are able to change? And until she has agency in the story, she doesn't actually appear as anything more than repeated images, like an echo as she's being represented. So that's like a physical way in which I approach creating the art in this story. Whereas Nathan, our main character, he always appears in different contexts. Even if an image of him repeats, it always repeats his intent in the story, not the eye collector's or his father's intent in the story.
Well, there's sort of two things that tie in here really quickly too. Is I'm a massive fan of David Lynch, and what I think is the brilliance and genius of David Lynch is that he realized that if you take a story form and you present a story in its traditional, conventional form, and you take, sections of the story and present them in traditional structure, like if you get the structure of the story right, and if you present it inside of a genre, and if you hit all the things in that the genre demands, like all the essential elements of the genre, what he realizes is that you don't have to do anything else. You can put anything else once you hit like the 20 things that make a story and a genre work. You can just change everything else. Is just can be randomized or can be altered and repeat. Like it doesn't have to make sense as a story as long as it feels like a story, and it doesn't have to. Like the Eye Collector does make sense, but like there's all these like you don't necessarily need to have, say, a wall that is a wall. Like the wall can also become like a bunch of lines and then turn into eyeballs, and then something can walk through it. And no one needs to even comment on this, as long as like on the surface, on the structural level, there's this other thing that's happening that is taking story precedence. Like, there's no reason why, people in a story need to have the same face all the time as a weird example.
Yeah, well, because the Eye Collector, here's a great example. Well, you're speaking specifically to the book now. The Eye Collector appears constantly shifting its appearance, and there are a few visual cues that let the reader know that, oh, that's the Eye Collector, that's the Eye Collector. It's not a big secret. What it is a dream logic. Like we set up the story so that it has story structure, and then we set up the characters so that the mother who is trapped visually. The creature that is a dream creature is represented with dream logic, always amorphous, always changing, always reappearing, always appearing in places where it's inconvenient for them to appear, and they seem to be moving the story from the outside of the panel borders or reaching into the panel borders. So like all of those internal structures were just like ways in which Jonathan and I said, okay, in our story that we're going to give up so many other rules while we're making it, we're going to be strictly, almost dogmatically locked into some other rules so that there at least feels like structure exists, even if the reader is not sure what it all means. They will be able to say, okay, well, this is repeating, this must be important. That's semiotics, right?
And a big part of that is the pace, right? Like the atmosphere and the pace, I think, are so important in horror. Even more than, like I always say that I'll always sacrifice sense for tone when it comes right down to it. And so a big part of that that kind of feeds in the process was one of the things we did was we hired Lyndon Radchenka to do our letters, who you'd work with a number of times. And one of the things we got him to do, which was really unusual, is I'd write my script, then I would pay him to letter blank pages and panel layouts for blank pages. Now, you wouldn't even necessarily follow those panel layouts, but it really just showed you kind of what I was thinking of in terms of the pace of things. So even if you were going to alter and shift things to improve them in certain ways, you just had a real clear sense of how I thought the story should flow and how it should feel from page to page. And so, again, my belief is that if you can lock the reader and the audience into feeling a certain way at a certain time, then they'll give you so much latitude in terms of the specifics and the details, because they don't, once they understand that this guy is creeped out by what they're seeing, it almost doesn't matter what they're seeing anymore.
Yeah, and there's this other side of it too, whereas comics as a visual medium, like one of the things that I bring to it is a pretty intense belief that comics as a visual medium, if it doesn't look interesting, don't bother.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like if you're going to just draw it in a boring way, in a didactic way, don't bother. There are plenty of people who render perfect anatomy, perfect locations. Their books do nothing emotionally for me. They just cannot reach me, even if the writing is good, because I'm just not interested in what I'm looking at. I love reading short stories. I love reading prose. I love books. There are a lot of graphic novels and a lot of comics works on the stands today by people who have forgotten that it is a visual medium and that they should let their artists run a little bit wild, because otherwise, make it a novel. Let people imagine the good parts, because the art is not doing you any favors. It's not bringing anything spectacular to it.
Yeah, and on my side of it, in terms of prose fiction, I have almost no interest in literary realism. I have almost no interest in psychological realism, although slightly more interest. I just, don't have a lot of interest in just so many of the, I feel like so many novels that are written today could have been written in the 1800s and nobody would know the difference, other than there's maybe a few less words. It's a bit more of a stripped down Hemingway-esque style, but it's essentially the same thing. People are walking from one side of the room to the other. People are saying what they mean. People are time is moving in a normal, forward chronologically. It sounds like a weird complaint, but I just feel like there's just so much, because I got a PhD in literature also, and I studied experimental art, and there's just so many tools that are in the toolbox that I just don't see people using anymore.
Let's address for a moment. I think it's important for us to address for a moment what kind of, that we sound like super stuffy, stodgy assholes, and that it's okay. So? It's okay sometimes to be a super stodgy, stuffy asshole. Well, in context, a different book I'm working on has a robot with a sword fighting monsters on the moon, right? It's not everything. Not every book has to encompass all these things that we're talking about. But why the Eye Collector exists the way it does is because all of these different pieces fit together into a project where we could explore it in a way that was interesting and fun.
There's also though a darker side, not a dark side, but a bit of a contrarian side of that, because the advice you'll always give to people, and I've heard you give a million times, and it is good advice, is you'll tell people hey, if you want to get into comics, make a 4-page comic, right? And it's great advice, it's smart advice, but there's the contrary. I heard you give that advice so much, Gregory, that I was, pick something, write what you know, do a 4-page comic, do something small and manageable. So I was like, whatever, Gregory. There's a bit of me that was like, I'm going to do a 120-page comic for my first comic, and it's going to be totally the opposite of everything that people do, and then I'll also get you to do it on top of that. There's awesome. A little bit of contrarian ambition in me, where I just want to do what
I give that make a 4-page comic. So many people who
it's good advice.
come to our workshops or come to our, speaking things, or come to see me at a show or whatever, and ask like, how do I get into comics? They're speaking from an aspirational point of view. They'd like to start, right? And there's nothing more daunting when you're trying to start something than someone telling you, well, give me a 200-page epic. You won't start, and you will believe that these people are somehow special because they can accomplish that. And there's not a single special thing about any published writer on earth, no matter how they are presented as geniuses. The deal is, what they can do that you haven't done yet is that they started something and finished it and then turned it in for broad criticism. So people can do that with a 4-page story, and they can accept the criticism because it doesn't take them that long. And if people didn't like it, they know they can do it again. And so that's why I give that advice so often. Those are to people who are starting out. People like yourself who have finished films, sold work, published short stories, published poetry collections, experimented in lots of genres. You've written for television. We both worked on a show together. You're not the person that advice is pointed at. So in a way, it's great that you took it as not applying to you, because it doesn't really apply to people who can already do things. If you have in your heart or mind an idea for something that you can accomplish, don't listen to advice that you should make it small. Go and do it. But if you haven't accomplished it after 12 months, you're never going to. So start
on the flip side. I did sort of take my initial idea of it being, way more than 5 issues, strip it down to a nice 5-act, 5-issue structure, and maybe before the kids burst in. So there is a level at which I was sort of listening to what you're saying, but there's also like this level, I think, at which I just feel like part of my ambition as an artist is that I want to do the thing that other people aren't doing. And I want to do the thing that people tell me I shouldn't do. And so a lot of the kind of stuff, I don't think it's a kind of a stuffiness or like we're old men yelling at clouds so much as like, I think we just both have that bit of that contrarian streak, right? Of like, oh, you want me to make a picture that looks pretty? Well, how about a picture where eyeballs are bleeding, because they're stuck through with moons? Like, you know what I mean? But also it'll be pretty. How do you think of that?
Yeah, it'll make it pretty awesome. Well,
but
that is
before the kids burst through the door, Gregory, let's just talk a little bit about how we hooked up with heavy metal and kind of where the Eye Collector is now and where it's going. Do you want to
But let's also recognize that I think that this audio file, Dan or whoever else is going to edit it, we may need to carve up into other little pieces so we don't have to truncate or fit everything in all in one place. There's like a long, boring part where we talk didactically about how we know each other. And then there's also an interesting process part. I think those could be carved up into different episodes pretty easily.
Yeah, even just one per option, one per podcast or whatever.
Yeah. So the thing about heavy metal to me as a publisher for this is that it's one of those things, I think like you, it's one of those places that exists for me nostalgically first and physically second. Heavy metal is a presence that existed in the world of literature, comics, science fiction, horror, and fantasy while I was a young boy, being exposed to my first ideas about what comics were. And then heavy metal really showed me that it's a genre magazine that is displaying that comics are a medium and not a genre, and that you can do anything with it. Because a kid that's reading the new issue of Daredevil at 10 years old and has been handed an issue of heavy metal by his older cousin with a caveat that like, don't let your mom catch you with this, sees now that comics aren't one thing. And they've never been one thing. And this magazine's been published for a decade before you came along, which means there's a whole secret history to how you can use words and pictures, which is a little bit contrarian. It's a little bit, does heavy metal have a long history of misogyny? For sure it does. Does it have a long history of, poor representation? Sure it does. Does it have a long history of challenging genre norms? It does that too. And so it's it's this weird publication history that it's always been open to weird and interesting new things. And now, as they do things like put armor on Tarna, they're criticized for being too palatable.
Well, this is, Matt, that I don't know how much we can talk about heavy metal, Dan. You may want to need to cut this out because I forget the contract has something about not talking too much about heavy metal, but like in a negative light.
Well,
But
we're not
I
talking
think,
about it negatively. We're just
no,
talking
but
about it where I'm interested in being part of heavy metal because it's pushed all of these boundaries all the time.
well,
But
and
we
also just kind of tie into the nostalgia thing you were saying, like, for me, I'm excited by a lot of the stuff they're doing now, like their book Super Nod and Angels Want to Wear My Red Shoes and so on. But I like you say, like it's nostalgia first for me because it was the book I bought, when I got off the bus in Winnipeg, and I, moved out, and I was like, and I picked it up, and Jodorowsky was in the issue I happened to pick up, and it was just crazy story, with this incredible art, and it was, and it had that experimental avant-garde edge that I really appreciated, and still, to this day, like that's the sort of my people in a way, right? Is like the genre avant-garde kind of edge of things.
and there'll always be a
But like you
place where
say,
taboo is,
yeah,
in conflict. Taboo is always in conflict with the mainstream, and whatever that mainstream is, the taboo is always different, depending on what decade you're in, or even what year.
but also, even though it has this kind of long history, it has this newer management, and it's been sort of turning in different directions. As you say, they're putting armor on Tarna now and stuff, and so I've been really interested in it. And one of the things that kind of we've kind of found great about heavy metal so far is how it really has been it's been a place that still kind of has kept that edge without while trying to kind of modernize it, and I also think that they have a really interesting it's just that legacy of it is my feeling these days is that is really trying to kind of hold on to the best of the legacy and shed the worst, and just on a really simple level,
Which
it's just cool to be published by heavy metal.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I'm excited to be with a publisher that doesn't mind if our book is very weird and has some imagery in it that
and has never asked us to make it less weird.
Yeah, if anything,
which
more
is
so.
startling, frankly.
Yeah. Now, all this to say that iCollector is being published through Heavy Metal's creator-owned imprint, which is another piece of the puzzle which made it interesting to us, because we were making a work that was experimental, and if it did or does strike with an audience, it'll be solely because of this weirdness we added, not because of editorial inputs, not because of corporate interests, not because of any of those things. So if you're taking a risk like that, you should own it.
Well, and I think that's another reason that we were just generally interested in going creative owned. Whoever we ended up with, was just we wanted to have that, be in that position where we could say no. So heavy metal hasn't come to ask us to change anything whatsoever, which has actually been surprising. Like nothing whatsoever have they asked us to change. But that's not the most normal situation. Usually they want to usually publishers, in my experience, even if they're good publishers, they want to get their fingers in there and they want to tell you what to do because they think it'll help. And sometimes it does help, but other times they're ruining it and they don't get it.
For right or wrong, my experience has always been that publishers want to help. That's always
and often
where they're coming from. It's not always the help that is good help, or the help you want, or the help you agree with, but they're always trying to help. I've had plenty of creative disagreements with lots of different projects that have not resulted in anger or book throwing, simply recognizing that every group that is publishing has a brand identity. They have a thing they're trying to maintain. There's a reason they asked for your book because they saw a potential in it that supports that. And when you veer away from that as you approach publication, that's going to lead to conflict. We haven't yet had any such things with heavy metal, which is a nice breath of fresh air. This could be one of those things, Jonathan, though, like as long as we're being a little tongue in cheek, where
we're
a few years from now, we might have wished.
Delivered the last issue yet.
Yeah, right. Well, we also may, being a little tongue in cheek, it might be one of those things where someone later will say, like, well, what this book really would have benefited from was, some more input from that publisher. So we'll see. You never know when you're making stuff. You don't know what'll strike. You don't know what will work. You don't know why it will work. There aren't too many people who, when first looking at the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, would have said, $1 billion hit maker.
It's true. The other thing I think that is just a real takeaway from me in here is I really have also appreciated just how willing, you've been to get weirder and weirder. And it's something that also Lyndon, our letterer, we've kind of instructed in many occasions, well, just try something stranger, and he's taken the initiative on that too in many places. And so I've been really pleased with his work. I think is exceptional. Your work is I think this is some of the best work you've ever done, personally. I have a hard time looking at how I'm doing because I'm looking at like the 15-year-old stuff and the newer stuff, and it's all a mishmash for me, but I'm pretty proud of how it's been turning out. Just where it really like syncs together and the three of us are hitting in a concert, like at the end of the second issue, I think especially is a major moment for me.
That for me was also a moment where I said, oh shit, this is really working. And without giving any spoilers to the reader, and just talking process, we had done this lettering page that had laid out the beats of the page, which I had seen blank. So I knew sort of the shape of the story. And then I said, there is a thematic element that is missing in this. We've been referencing the moon. We've been talking about the moon. This last couple of pages of this book, it's absent in any of this. I have to find a way to bring it in visually. And so once I brought that imagery to it, it changed some of the beats and the layouts and the lettering. And then the lettering got put back over the new artwork. And then Jonathan, looking at that, said, oh, I need to rewrite some of it so that it matches the tone and beat. And I didn't know he was doing that rewrite. And so when the page came back to me, rewritten to best suit the art. So I had adjusted it to suit the theme. And then the letterer had adjusted it to suit the pace. And then when those two things came together, the writer came in and readjusted it to address tone again in the language. And that's when I was like, oh, wow, this is something new. And it's bigger than the sum of all of our efforts. And, as an artistic person, what more do you possibly want from that?
Yeah, it's just one of those sort of moments. There's been a couple in these issues where it's just like there's been a couple pages where it's really hit, where I just think things have really clicked across the art and letters and writing, and just kind of it all come together so perfectly. And there's a couple of moments with Mother in particular. I think the Mother character is really one that in my original drafts, I was very frustrated by how I didn't feel like the Mother was working. And I think it's kind of transmuted over this point, to the point where the Mother is maybe one of the most interesting characters in this book. And one of the more powerful, figures. Whereas, again, I got very frustrated that I felt she was just too weak a character in my original scripts. And so I think things like that, and seeing certain things change from my early drafts to how it ended up, and seeing sort of moments where Yumi and Lyndon are all kind of in sync and it's firing off just right. At the start of issue 3 is a really great set of moments. There's at the end of issue 2, some really amazing stuff. Issue 5, I think, is going to be just explosively amazing. I'm really excited by how that kind of story is culminating, and there's just so much going on that I'm just really thrilled about it.
Well, one of those times, the last issue of the series is definitely one of those times where, as an illustrator, I looked at the work that was there and the pace we were at, and I was like, I could finish this the way it's written, no problem. We could do it as we've agreed, and we laid out what it would be. But some of these things, I think I need to add 5 more pages. Wait, maybe it's 10. It might be 15 more pages. Am I prepared to do that for the sake of delivering the story on the mark that it's pointed towards? And it was one of the few times in my professional art life where I didn't care if it made financial sense. It had to be done that way. So I was just going to do it.
Well, and I just want to point out for people who are listening and thinking of creating comics, like that is exactly the kind of thing. And when you see this final issue and how it is expanded beyond the other issues and some of the things that has made possible in terms of this pace and the draw of the story, that could never have happened if you were a hired gun. It literally, you wouldn't have been allowed to do it. One, right?
Yeah, true.
But also you just could never have justified that.
Yeah.
That extra work.
Yeah. And it was one of those moments where it's like, well, I'm putting this extra work in. So if it's better, maybe it connects better with readers. Maybe it connects better as an experience. And since I am part owner of this, doesn't it behoove me to then put my best efforts in? Ownership, as anything, when you have your own agency in something, you tend to treat it with a little bit more respect.
What's some final thoughts, Gregory, before my kids smash through the door and ruin everything?
My kids have been thumping around upstairs, so I'm sure some of that's on the audio. My final thoughts are that I'm really excited to see the audience reaction, good or bad, to our very strange experiment that is the Eye Collector. I'm really excited to take it to a reopening world and see people's response to it in person. And I really hope that people will take a chance and order it direct from the Heavy Metal website, because it's some of my favorite work in the last 24 months.
Yeah, and my final sort of thoughts on it all is I'm just very grateful this project has gone the way I better than I thought it would go. I was it was one of those projects where, if I'm being really honest, it took so long because I just wasn't working on it like I should have been, because I wanted to not screw it up. And I was just a little afraid of screwing it up, because there's a lot of personal sort of stuff in there, and even though it may not seem so, and it has a real power for me. And I just, have been afraid to kind of finish it wrong. And I just feel like, what Lyndon did as a letterer was just so on point, and what you've been doing, I think, on it has been transformative with it and the material, and it has been some of the best work I've seen you do. And I'm to hook up with Heavy Metal for this book, who I think, if anybody likes this book, is going to be the people who, are in for Heavy Metal and its, strange ride of a crazy avant-garde genre, And so I just feel like it's come together in a way I would never have anticipated. And I'm, just really thrilled about it. So, I'm just very grateful for everybody else who got involved and kind of, I think, elevated it in exactly the way I was afraid I wouldn't be able to elevate it myself.
Well, this
I'll also take a lot of credit for it.
This has been Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. My co-conspirator and collaborator on the Eye Collector, Dr. Jonathan Ball. His new award-winning collection of short stories is available anywhere, The Lightning of Possible Storms, and you can, of course, get the Eye Collector at heavymetal.com and just look up the Eye Collector and you will find it there. And it'll be soon available in comic stores everywhere and bookstores worldwide.